The ocean was calm that morning, its surface shimmering under the golden rays of the rising sun. Ethan Carter, a seasoned fisherman with years of experience braving the open waters, was piloting his small fishing boat, the Mariner's Hope, toward his favorite fishing spot. The salt-laden breeze ruffled his gray hair, and the hum of the boat's engine was the only sound that accompanied the vast stillness around him. For Ethan, the sea wasn't just a job, it was his solace. After losing his wife 2 years ago, he found peace in the rhythm of the waves and the simplicity of life on the water. But today would be different. Ethan had just cast his nets when a strange noise broke through the tranquil morning. It was a deep, mournful sound, a sound that echoed through the air and sent chills down his spine. He froze, his hands gripping the edge of the boat. "A whale?" he murmured to himself, scanning the horizon. The sound came again, louder this time and unmistakably distressed. Ethan squinted at the water ahead and spotted something unusual. A large, dark shape breached the surface, and even from a distance, he could see it moving sluggishly. Ethan's heart pounded. He'd seen whales before, but never like this. Whatever was out there, it was in trouble. As he steered his boat closer, the full scene came into view. A massive humpback whale was struggling just beneath the surface, its body covered in thick clusters of barnacles. But that wasn't the only problem. It was tangled in a web of discarded fishing nets, the ropes cutting into its flesh. Ethan's stomach tightened at the sight. He had heard stories of marine animals getting caught in ghost nets, but seeing it in person was gut-wrenching. "I'm here, big guy," Ethan muttered, shutting off the engine to avoid startling the creature. He grabbed his toolkit, which included a long hooked pole and a pair of heavy-duty cutting shears. As Ethan approached the whale, it let out another deep, mournful cry. He could see its dark, intelligent eye watching him, as if pleading for help. "Easy now," Ethan said softly, leaning over the edge of the boat. "I'm going to get you out of this mess." He began working carefully, using the pole to snag the nearest piece of netting. The whale flinched at first, but as Ethan spoke in soothing tones, it seemed to calm down. The barnacles covering the whale's skin told a story of neglect and hardship. Ethan had learned from his marine biologist friend Rachel that barnacles often attach themselves to weak or injured whales that couldn't swim fast enough to keep them off. "This isn't just about the nets, is it?" Ethan murmured. "You've been struggling for a long time." The work was slow and painstaking. Every time Ethan cut a piece of netting away, the whale shifted slightly, making it harder to reach the next section. Sweat dripped down Ethan's face as the sun climbed higher in the sky, but he refused to give up. After what felt like hours, the final rope fell away, and the whale let out a low, rumbling sound that Ethan swore sounded like gratitude. He leaned back, his arms aching but his heart full. "There you go, big guy," he said, watching as the whale floated freely for the first time in who knows how long. But just as Ethan was about to start his engine and head back to shore, something unexpected happened. The whale didn't swim away. Instead, it lingered near the boat, its massive body rolling slightly, as if trying to signal something. By the time he looked, she was already swimming back to the shore. "What is it?" Ethan asked aloud, leaning over the side of the boat. The whale let out a deep call and dove beneath the surface, disappearing into the depths. For a moment, Ethan thought it was gone, but then it resurfaced a few yards away, breaching with an urgency that caught his attention. Ethan frowned, his fisherman's instincts kicking in. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you?" He turned the engine back on and followed the whale as it swam slowly but deliberately toward the open sea. After about 10 minutes of following the creature, Ethan spotted something in the distance. At first, it looked like another dark shadow beneath the water, but as he drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was another whale, smaller, likely a juvenile, and it was trapped. This young whale was ensnared in even worse netting than the first, and it wasn't moving. Its body was still, its tail barely twitching. Ethan's heart sank. "Oh no," he whispered. The larger whale swam around the smaller one, nudging it gently as if encouraging it to stay strong. Ethan realized this must be the mother, and she had led him here to save her calf. Ethan sprang into action, his exhaustion forgotten. He maneuvered the boat as close as he could without causing further distress, and grabbed his tools again. "Hang in there, little one," he muttered as he reached down with the hooked pole. The calf didn't flinch like the mother had. It was too weak to resist. The mother whale stayed close, circling protectively as Ethan worked. He could feel her eyes on him, and though he'd never say it aloud, he felt a strange connection to her, an unspoken understanding that they were both fighting for the same thing. It took even longer to free the calf, the tightly wound nets cutting deep into its delicate fins. Ethan's hands were blistered, his arms trembling from effort, but he didn't stop. Finally, the last piece of net fell away, and the calf twitched slightly, its tail moving more freely. "You're free now," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. The mother whale let out a low, resonant call, and the calf responded with a faint sound of its own. Ethan watched in awe as the two whales swam side by side, the calf regaining its strength with each passing moment. As Ethan sat back on the deck of his boat, exhaustion washing over him, the two whales lingered nearby. The mother breached once, a graceful arc that sent a cascade of water into the air. It felt like a thank you, and Ethan couldn't help but smile. But just as he thought his part in their story was over, the mother whale turned back toward his boat, making another deep call. "What now?" Ethan muttered, leaning forward. The mother began to swim again, leading the way toward something on the horizon. Ethan hesitated, then started his engine. "If you're leading me somewhere," he said, "I guess I'll follow." And so Ethan set off once again, the two whales guiding him toward a new mystery waiting beneath the waves. The sun hung high above the ocean as Ethan Carter steered his fishing boat, following the two whales. The mother and her calf swam in a deliberate path, occasionally breaching, as if to ensure he kept up. "What are you showing me?" Ethan murmured, his voice barely audible over the steady hum of the boat's engine. He had spent decades on these waters, yet something about this felt different, purposeful. It was as if the mother whale, newly freed from her entrapment, was leading him to something extraordinary. The whales slowed as they neared a small, rocky outcrop that jutted out from the waves. Ethan had passed this area countless times, dismissing it as just another unremarkable feature of the vast ocean. But now he noticed something unusual. The water around the rocks was crystal clear, revealing a vibrant underwater world teeming with life. Schools of fish darted beneath the surface, their scales catching the sunlight like shards of glass. Ethan killed the engine and leaned over the side of the boat, peering into the depths. The mother whale let out a low, resonant call, the sound vibrating through the water. The calf responded weakly but with growing strength, and the two whales swam toward the rocks, disappearing below the surface. Ethan grabbed his snorkel gear and hesitated for only a moment before slipping into the water. As soon as he submerged, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The underwater landscape was breathtaking, a kaleidoscope of coral, sea anemones, and marine creatures thriving in perfect harmony. But what drew his attention most was the whales. The mother whale hovered near a small underwater cave, nudging the calf toward it. Ethan swam closer, careful to keep his movements slow and non-threatening. When he reached the cave, he froze. Inside, illuminated by shafts of sunlight filtering through the water, were more whales. There were at least 4 of them, each varying in size and covered in varying degrees of barnacles. Some bore scars from past injuries, while others moved with the sluggishness of animals who had endured prolonged hardship. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't just a random group of whales, this was a sanctuary, a place where injured and weary whales came to heal. The mother whale entered the cave, guiding her calf to rest among the others. She turned back toward Ethan, her dark eyes locking with his. "I get it," Ethan thought to himself. "You brought me here to see this, to understand." As Ethan floated in the water observing the whales, he noticed something strange about the barnacles covering their bodies. They weren't the usual rough gray clusters he was familiar with. These barnacles had a faint golden sheen, and they seemed to pulse faintly in the light. Curious, Ethan swam closer to one of the whales and gently brushed his hand against a cluster of barnacles. To his astonishment, the barnacles seemed to react, shifting slightly under his touch. "What on earth?" Ethan muttered through his snorkel. He had a strong urge to scrape one off for a closer look, but he hesitated. These creatures were already vulnerable, and he didn't want to cause them any more pain. When he resurfaced, Ethan climbed back onto his boat, his mind spinning. He needed answers. He grabbed his satellite phone and called Rachel, his marine biologist friend. "Ethan, you never call," Rachel said cheerfully when she picked up. "What's going on?" "I just saw something incredible," Ethan began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I found a group of whales, a sort of sanctuary. But there's something strange about them." "Strange how?" Rachel asked, her tone shifting to one of professional curiosity. "They're covered in barnacles, golden ones, and they seem alive. More alive than usual, I mean." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Golden barnacles?" Rachel repeated. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Ethan replied. "Have you ever heard of anything like that?" Rachel hesitated. "There are legends, but nothing scientifically proven. Some coastal communities believe golden barnacles are a sign of divine protection or healing. But if you're seeing this in real life, it could be something entirely new." Ethan told Rachel about the sanctuary and the mother whale who had led him there. By the time he finished, Rachel was practically bursting with excitement. "I need to see this for myself," she said. "Can you send me your coordinates?" Ethan hesitated. The sanctuary felt sacred, and he wasn't sure if he should share it. But he trusted Rachel. "All right," he said finally, "but you have to promise to keep this quiet. No media, no big teams, just you." "Of course," Rachel said. "I'll be there first thing tomorrow." The next day, Rachel arrived on Ethan's boat, her gear packed and ready. As they made their way back to the rocky outcrop, Ethan filled her in on every detail he could remember. When they reached the site, Rachel wasted no time donning her snorkel gear and diving into the water. Ethan followed, watching as her eyes widened at the sight of the sanctuary. "This is incredible," Rachel said when they resurfaced. "We need to document this. If these whales are recovering here, this could change how we approach conservation." Rachel spent hours studying the whales, taking detailed notes and carefully scraping off a small sample of the golden barnacles for analysis. She was meticulous, ensuring she didn't harm the animals. As the sun began to set, Rachel turned to Ethan, her expression a mix of wonder and urgency. "These barnacles are unlike anything I've ever seen," she said. "They might hold properties we don't even understand yet, but more importantly, this sanctuary needs to be protected. If word gets out, it could attract the wrong kind of attention." Ethan nodded. "Elle?" "Ah. If then we keep it between us, for now at least." That night, as Ethan lay in his bunk, he thought about the mother whale who had led him here. She hadn't just asked for help, she had entrusted him with a secret. He stared out the small window at the dark waves beyond. The sanctuary was a reminder of how little humans truly understood about the ocean and the creatures within it. And he couldn't shake the feeling that his journey with these whales was far from over. The days following Ethan's discovery of the whale sanctuary were a mix of excitement and apprehension. Rachel was working tirelessly to analyze the golden barnacle samples she had collected, and her initial findings were baffling. "Ethan," Rachel said over the phone one evening, "I don't even know how to describe this. These barnacles are alive in a way I've never seen. They're not just parasites, they're symbiotic." Ethan frowned. "Symbiotic? You mean they're helping the whales?" "Exactly," Rachel replied. "They seem to be releasing some kind of compound into the whale's skin, almost like medicine. It could explain why the sanctuary is full of injured whales. They might be coming here to heal." Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring out at the horizon. "That's incredible," he murmured. "But it's also dangerous," Rachel continued. "If the wrong people find out about this, poachers, corporations, anyone who sees dollar signs, this sanctuary could be wiped out." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's not gonna happen. I'll make sure of it." The next morning, Ethan returned to the sanctuary. He anchored his boat near the rocky outcrop and slipped into the water, carrying his snorkel and a waterproof camera. It was evening time by the time he returned, and the woman who opened the door to him smiled. As he approached the underwater cave, he noticed something unusual. The water felt colder than before, and the normally vibrant corals seemed dimmer, almost as if the life had been drained from it. The whales were still there, but their behavior had changed. They moved restlessly, their low calls reverberating through the water with a sense of unease. "What's going on?" Ethan thought, swimming closer. The mother whale, who had led him to the sanctuary, swam toward him. Her massive body moved with urgency, and her dark eyes seemed to plead with him. She let out a loud, sharp call and swam toward the entrance of the cave, then back to Ethan, as if urging him to follow. Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what she wanted, but he trusted her. Adjusting his snorkel, he followed her deeper into the cave. Inside, the light was dim and the water grew colder. The mother whale paused, hovering near the cave wall. Ethan swam closer and gasped. The wall was covered in strange, web-like strands of fishing nets. They weren't just debris. They were tangled and knotted in a way that seemed deliberate, almost as if someone had placed them there. Ethan's pulse quickened. He reached out and carefully touched the netting. It was tough and industrial, far stronger than what he'd encountered on the whales before. "This wasn't an accident," he muttered. As Ethan turned to leave the cave, he felt a sudden shift in the water. A dark shadow loomed behind him, and he whipped around to see a massive shape gliding through the entrance. It was another whale, larger than the mother and scarred from years of struggle. But it wasn't alone. Two smaller shadows swam alongside it, dolphins, their sleek bodies moving with precision. Ethan's breath caught. He had heard of dolphins and whales forming alliances, but seeing it up close was something else entirely. The dolphins swam toward Ethan, their movements agitated. They darted around him, nudging him gently but insistently toward the surface. "They're warning me," Ethan realized. Breaking through the surface, Ethan climbed back onto his boat, gasping for air. He scanned the horizon and froze. In the distance, a large fishing trawler was approaching. Its rusty hull and heavy equipment suggested it wasn't there for legal fishing. Ethan grabbed his binoculars and focused on the ship. What he saw made his blood run cold. The deck was loaded with massive nets, and a group of men stood near the railing, scanning the water with binoculars of their own. "They're looking for the whales," Ethan whispered. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't let them find the sanctuary. But what could one man in a small fishing boat do against a fully equipped trawler? He picked up his radio and called Rachel. "Rachel, we've got a problem," he said quickly. "There's a trawler heading toward the sanctuary. They're looking for something, and I'm guessing it's the whales." Rachel's voice was tense. "I'll call the authorities, but it'll take time for them to get there. You need to stall them." Ethan swallowed hard. "Stall them? How?" "Use your boat, your instincts, whatever you can. Just keep them away from the sanctuary." As the trawler drew closer, Ethan started his engine and steered his boat directly into its path. He waved his arms, trying to appear as a clueless fisherman. "Hey!" he shouted, his voice carrying across the water. "You're in my fishing spot!" The men on the trawler ignored him at first, but as he continued to circle in front of their ship, they finally shouted back. "Get out of the way," one of them yelled. Ethan didn't budge. "This is a protected area," he shouted. "You can't fish here." The trawler's captain stepped onto the deck, his face hard and weathered. He glared at Ethan, then spoke into a radio. Ethan's heart pounded. He had bought a little time, but he knew it wouldn't last. Suddenly he saw movement in the water nearby. The mother whale and her calf surfaced briefly, their massive bodies shimmering in the sunlight before disappearing again. They're still here, Ethan thought. I've got to protect them. Ethan revved his engine and sped toward the trawler, deliberately crossing its path and forcing it to slow down. The crew shouted angrily, but he didn't care. Every second he delayed them was a second the whales could use to escape. Behind him he saw the dolphins breach the surface, their movements quick and purposeful. It was as if they understood what he was doing and were helping to guide the whales away. Minutes felt like hours as Ethan continued to outmaneuver the trawler. Finally, in the distance, he saw the telltale lights of a Coast Guard vessel approaching. Relief washed over him as the trawler's crew noticed the authorities and began to retreat. Ethan slowed his boat, watching as the sanctuary's protectors arrived just in time. That evening, as Ethan anchored near the sanctuary, he watched the mother whale and her calf swim together under the moonlight. The sanctuary was safe, for now. But Ethan knew the fight wasn't over. If poachers were targeting this place, it was only a matter of time before they returned. Sitting on the deck of his boat, Ethan made a silent vow. "As long as I'm here," he said softly, "I'll protect you." The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of waves gently lapping against the hull of his boat. The sanctuary's waters looked calm and peaceful, but the events of the previous day weighed heavily on his mind. He sat on the deck, sipping a steaming cup of coffee, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the trawler. Rachel had assured him the Coast Guard would monitor the area, but Ethan knew better than to let his guard down. The poachers had found this place once. They could find it again. His thoughts were interrupted by the familiar sound of a whale's call. Ethan set his cup down and peered over the side of the boat. The mother whale was nearby, her calf swimming close to her side. "You're still here," Ethan said softly, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Good." Later that day, Rachel arrived in her research vessel, carrying new equipment to help document the sanctuary. She climbed aboard Ethan's boat, her face a mix of excitement and determination. "We've got a lot of work to do," she said, unloading a waterproof camera, sonar equipment, and several binders filled with notes. "If we can prove the significance of this sanctuary, we'll have a better chance of getting it officially protected." Ethan nodded. "What do you need from me?" "Just keep doing what you've been doing," Rachel said. "You're the heart of this operation, Ethan. The whales trust you, and that's something no amount of equipment can replace." The next few days were a blur of activity. Ethan and Rachel worked tirelessly, documenting the whale's behavior and gathering evidence of the golden barnacle's unique properties. The more they observed, the clearer it became that this sanctuary wasn't just a resting place, it was a vital healing ground for marine life. Rachel discovered that the golden barnacles released a chemical compound that accelerated the healing of wounds and reduced inflammation. It was a discovery with profound implications, not just for the whales, but potentially for human medicine as well. "We have to keep this quiet," Rachel said one evening as they reviewed their findings. "If this gets out, it could attract even more poachers. And not just for the whales, but for the barnacles themselves." "But," Rachel said, Ethan agreed. But deep down, he knew their work would eventually draw attention, no matter how careful they were. The calm didn't last long. Early one morning, while Rachel was out on a dive and Ethan was preparing breakfast, he noticed a strange glint on the horizon. Grabbing his binoculars, he focused on the area and felt his stomach drop. The trawler was back. It was moving slowly, its crew scanning the water with long poles equipped with sonar devices. This time, it wasn't alone. Two smaller boats flanked it, their engines humming ominously. Ethan's heart raced as he grabbed his radio. "Rachel, we've got company." "What kind of company?" Rachel's voice crackled through the speaker. "The worst kind," Ethan replied. "Poachers." And they brought backup. Rachel surfaced moments later, climbing onto Ethan's boat. "We need to alert the Coast Guard," she said, grabbing her phone. Ethan nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the approaching vessels. "They'll take time to get here," he said grimly. "We need to stall them." Again. Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "What's the plan?" Ethan grabbed a flare gun and a small air horn. "We're going to make as much noise as we can and distract them long enough for the Coast Guard to arrive." As the poachers' boats drew closer, Ethan started his engine and sped toward them, blasting the air horn. Rachel followed in her research vessel, using her boat's loudspeakers to broadcast a warning. "This is a protected area." Rachel's voice boomed over the water. "Leave immediately, or the authorities will be notified." The poachers didn't respond. Instead, one of the smaller boats peeled off and began circling Ethan's boat, its crew shouting angrily. Ethan kept his course, weaving erratically to keep them from getting too close. "Come on," he muttered. "Keep your eyes on me." Meanwhile, the mother whale and her calf surfaced nearby, their presence drawing the attention of the second, smaller boat. The crew quickly adjusted their course, aiming to intercept the whales. Rachel saw what was happening and acted fast. She steered her boat between the poachers and the whales, blocking their path. "Not today," she muttered, gripping the wheel tightly. The poachers shouted and waved their fists, but Rachel didn't budge. Her boat was small, but her resolve was unshakable. The situation escalated when the trawler deployed its nets. The massive webs of rope and metal weights sank into the water, creating an immediate hazard for the whales. Ethan's jaw tightened as he saw the nets descend. "Rachel, we need to cut those nets before the whales get tangled." Rachel nodded, grabbing a pair of heavy-duty shears. "I'll handle the nets. You keep them distracted." As Rachel maneuvered her boat toward the trawler's nets, Ethan sped toward the larger vessel, firing a flare into the air. The bright red light arced across the sky, drawing the attention of the poachers and signaling to any nearby authorities. The trawler's crew yelled angrily, but Ethan ignored them. He focused on staying between the trawler and the sanctuary, buying Rachel enough time to work. Underwater, the mother whale let out a series of loud, echoing calls. The other whales in the sanctuary responded, their deep voices creating a haunting symphony that seemed to fill the ocean. Ethan wasn't sure what the calls meant, but they had an immediate effect. The dolphins reappeared, darting through the water like streaks of silver. They swarmed the poachers' nets, their swift movements confusing and disorienting the crew. Rachel took advantage of the chaos, cutting through the nets with practiced efficiency. "Almost there," she muttered, her hands working quickly, just as the situation seemed on the verge of spiraling out of control, the distant wail of a siren pierced the air. Ethan turned to see a Coast Guard vessel speeding toward them, its blue lights flashing. Relief flooded through him as the poachers began retreating, their smaller boats racing back toward the trawler. Within minutes, the entire fleet had fled, leaving the sanctuary unscathed. That evening, Ethan and Rachel sat on the deck of his boat, watching the sunset. The sanctuary was quiet, the whales resting peacefully beneath the waves. "We did it," Rachel said, her voice tired but triumphant. "For now," Ethan replied. "But they'll be back, and we need to be ready." Rachel nodded, agreed. "But today, we made a difference. And that's something to be proud of." Ethan stared out at the horizon, the mother whale's calls echoing faintly in his mind. "This isn't just about the whales," he said softly. "It's about protecting something bigger than ourselves." Days turned into weeks, and the sanctuary remained quiet. The Coast Guard had increased their patrols, deterring any further attempts from poachers, and Rachel had contacted trusted colleagues to help keep the sanctuary's location a closely guarded secret. For the first time in weeks, Ethan allowed himself to breathe a little easier. But despite the calm, something was nagging at him. The golden barnacles that covered the whales were unlike anything he had ever seen, and the way the mother whale had led him to her calf and the sanctuary felt too deliberate to be a coincidence. "It's like they're trying to tell us something," Ethan said one morning as he and Rachel sat on the deck of his boat, reviewing their notes. Rachel nodded, flipping through her binder. I've been thinking the same thing. Their behavior is highly intelligent, almost coordinated. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the horizon. What if there's more to this sanctuary than we realize? What if it's not just a healing ground, but something bigger? Later that day, Ethan decided to dive back into the sanctuary, feeling a pull he couldn't explain. With Rachel monitoring from her boat, he slipped into the water and swam toward the underwater cave where the whales had gathered. As he entered the cave, the mother whale appeared, her massive body gliding gracefully through the water. She turned to face Ethan, her dark eyes filled with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "All right, big girl," Ethan murmured through his snorkel. "Show me what you want me to see." The mother whale swam deeper into the cave, and Ethan followed, careful to keep a safe distance. The water grew cooler, and the light from the surface faded, replaced by a faint golden glow emanating from the barnacles on the whales' bodies. Ethan paused, his heart pounding as he realized the barnacles weren't just reacting to the light. They were glowing brighter the deeper he went. "What the hell?" he muttered, reaching out to touch the cave wall. Beneath his hand, the rock was smooth and warm, almost like polished stone, and then he saw it. Faint carvings etched into the walls, their patterns intricate and deliberate. Ethan's mind raced as he traced the carvings with his fingers. They looked ancient, yet there was something oddly familiar about them. The patterns resembled waves, spirals, and shapes that looked like whales and dolphins. The mother whale let out a deep, resonant call, drawing his attention back to her. She hovered near a section of the wall that seemed to shimmer faintly, as if the rock itself was alive. Ethan swam closer, his heart pounding. As he reached the shimmering section of the wall, the golden barnacles on the mother whale's body glowed brighter, casting an otherworldly light across the cave. Then, to his astonishment, the shimmering wall began to move. The section of the cave wall shifted, revealing a narrow tunnel. The mother whale swam through it effortlessly, her massive body disappearing into the golden glow. Ethan hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to turn back, but something deep within him urged him to follow. Adjusting his snorkel, he took a deep breath and swam into the tunnel. The water felt warmer here, and the golden light grew brighter with each stroke. As he emerged into a larger chamber, Ethan froze. The chamber was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls were covered in the same carvings, but they glowed faintly, as if pulsing with energy. In the center of the chamber was a massive, glowing formation, an underwater reef made entirely of golden barnacles. The reef seemed alive, its surface shifting and pulsing with a gentle rhythm. Surrounding it were the whales, their bodies illuminated by the barnacles' light. The mother whale and her calf rested near the reef, their movements slow and peaceful. Ethan floated in awe, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just a sanctuary, it was a living, breathing entity. As Ethan approached the reef, he felt a strange sensation wash over him. It was as if the water itself was alive, pulsing with a warmth that soothed his aching muscles and calmed his racing thoughts. The golden barnacles on the reef shimmered, releasing tiny particles into the water. The whales swam through the particles, their movements deliberate and serene. Ethan reached out hesitantly, his hand brushing against the reef. The moment he made contact, a surge of warmth flooded through him, and for a brief moment he felt connected. Images flashed through his mind, visions of whales migrating, dolphins leaping through the waves, and the ocean teeming with life. He saw the sanctuary as it once was, untouched and thriving, and the threats it now faced from human activity. Ethan pulled his hand back, gasping for breath. The connection faded, but the images lingered in his mind. He looked at the mother whale, who watched him with a calm, knowing gaze. "You brought me here for a reason," he said softly, his voice muffled by the water. "You wanted me to see this." "The same reason." The mother whale let out a low call, the sound reverberating through the chamber. Ethan felt tears sting his eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of what he had just experienced. But his hopes and dreams began to decline as a grim face appeared. When he resurfaced and climbed back onto his boat, Rachel was waiting for him, her face filled with concern. "Ethan, are you okay?" she asked, rushing to his side. "I'm fine," Ethan said, his voice shaky. "But Rachel, you're not going to believe what I just saw." As he recounted his experience, Rachel listened in stunned silence. When he finished, she sat back, her expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "If what you're saying is true, then this sanctuary isn't just important, it's sacred," she said. "That reef, it could be the key to understanding marine ecosystems in ways we've never imagined." Ethan nodded. "But it's also fragile. If anyone finds out about this, it could be destroyed." Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll protect it, whatever it takes." Then we'll protect it, whatever it takes. That night, as Ethan sat alone on his boat, staring out at the moonlit ocean, he felt a deep sense of purpose. The sanctuary wasn't just a place. It was a living testament to the resilience of the natural world, and it was his responsibility to protect it. Ethan barely slept that night. His mind raced with images of the golden reef, the glowing barnacles, and the mother whale's knowing eyes. It was clear to him now, the sanctuary wasn't just a refuge for the whales. It was a symbol of the interconnectedness of all life in the ocean, a delicate balance that humans had the power to protect or destroy. But he also knew the sanctuary's existence was under threat. The poachers had already found it once, and if they returned, the reef and the whales it nurtured could be lost forever. By sunrise, Ethan had made up his mind. He would fight for the sanctuary no matter the cost. Ethan and Rachel worked tirelessly over the next few days, putting together a plan to safeguard the sanctuary. Rachel reached out to a trusted network of marine conservationists, sharing only the essential details about the site and its significance. "We need to move fast," Rachel said one afternoon, her voice tinged with urgency. "If we can get this place designated as a marine protected area, it'll make it illegal for anyone to fish or interfere here. But we'll need hard evidence to convince the authorities." Ethan nodded. "We've got the footage and the data from the barnacles. What else do we need?" Rachel hesitated. Compelling story, something that'll make people care. You've been here since the beginning, Ethan. You've connected with the whales in a way no one else has. If we're going to make this work, we need you to tell their story." Ethan's chest tightened at the thought of stepping into the spotlight, but he knew Rachel was right. "I'll do it," he said finally. "For the whales." The following week, Ethan and Rachel hosted a private meeting with representatives from local government, environmental organizations, and marine researchers. Ethan stood at the front of the room, a series of images and videos from the sanctuary projected onto a screen behind him. He spoke from the heart, recounting the story of the mother whale and her calf, the discovery of the golden reef, and the desperate need to protect the sanctuary. "These whales aren't just surviving here, they're healing," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This place is a miracle, and it's up to us to make sure it stays that way." The room was silent for a moment after Ethan finished. Then, one of the government officials leaned forward. "You've made a compelling case, Mr. Carter," she said. "If what you've shown us is accurate, this sanctuary is unlike anything we've ever seen. We'll start the process of securing its protected status immediately." But just as things seemed to be moving in the right direction, disaster struck. Ethan was out on the water one morning, monitoring the whales, when he noticed a familiar silhouette on the horizon. His blood ran cold as he realized the poachers had returned, this time with an even larger crew and more equipment. Ethan grabbed his radio and called Rachel. "They're back," he said, his voice tense. Rachel's response was immediate. "I'm calling the Coast Guard. Hold them off as long as you can." Ethan steered his boat directly into the path of the poachers, blasting his air horn and shouting at the top of his lungs, "This is a protected area. Turn back now!" The poachers ignored him, their boats spreading out as they prepared to deploy their massive nets. Ethan's heart pounded as he realized the whales were nearby, completely unaware of the danger. "Not on my watch," he muttered, gripping the wheel. As the poachers' nets began to descend, Ethan sped toward them, using his boat to block their path. The poachers shouted angrily, but Ethan didn't back down. Behind him, the mother whale surfaced, her calf swimming close to her side. She let out a powerful call, the sound reverberating through the water like a warning. Moments later, the rest of the whales emerged, their massive bodies breaching the surface in unison. It was a breathtaking sight, and for a moment, even the poachers seemed stunned. But the moment of awe didn't last. The poachers regrouped, determined to catch what they could. Ethan's boat rocked violently as one of the smaller vessels rammed into it, trying to force him out of the way. He gritted his teeth, refusing to move. Suddenly, a pod of dolphins appeared, their sleek bodies darting through the water. They swarmed the poachers' boats, creating chaos as they leapt and splashed. Ethan couldn't help but smile. "Looks like I've got reinforcements." Just as the situation seemed to be spiraling out of control, the wail of a siren cut through the chaos. The Coast Guard vessel appeared on the horizon, its blue lights flashing. The poachers scrambled to retreat, hauling in their nets and speeding away before the authorities could reach them. Ethan let out a sigh of relief, his hands shaking as he gripped the wheel. The sanctuary was safe. For now. That evening, Ethan and Rachel stood on the deck of his boat, watching the sunset. The mother whale and her calf surfaced nearby, their silhouettes illuminated by the golden light. "We did it," Rachel said softly. Ethan nodded, but his expression was somber. "For now. But they'll keep coming back as long as there's money to be made." Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. "How then we'll keep fighting. This sanctuary is worth it." In the weeks that followed, the sanctuary was officially designated as a marine protected area, securing its future. Ethan and Rachel continued their work, raising awareness and rallying support to protect not just the sanctuary, but marine ecosystems around the world. As Ethan stood on the deck of his boat one quiet evening, watching the mother whale and her calf swim together, he felt a deep sense of purpose. The sanctuary had given him more than a mission. It had given him hope, and he would spend the rest of his life ensuring it stayed that way.